Yes, guys, I'm sorry. Welcome to Ace Podcast Nation. Welcome to a special edition of Ace Podcast Nation as well. So basically, Monday is normally a members only show where myself and Reese do a bit of unscripted, uncensored. We talk about all the different things in the news that week and stuff like that. Unfortunately, Reese isn't available. Rob Boyle's on holiday. And I was like, what should I do this evening? What could we do? What could we do for a bit of fun? Have a bit of a chit chat. What's going on? And as we all love a bit of sport and that. So I thought the Ashes finishes today. Unfortunately, our cricket series is on like a long-term hiatus due to the commitments of my co-hosts. Obviously, West Indian cricketer Kieran Powell is here, there, and everywhere around the world, either playing cricket or living up that celebrity life. And now Norman is a new father, so we haven't been able to do the cricket series. So I thought, fifth test, Stuart Broad's retiring. Let's have a little look back at the series and discuss some of the stuff. It's been an incredible series at that. It's been really one of my favourite series. I've watched many Ashes series in my 40 years, and it was one of my favourite ever. Really was. It's been absolutely incredible. Just such a good series. And I actually thought, just as like a quick thought, I really believe that England were probably the better side. And actually, they were very unlucky with the weather, because I think they would have won 3-2 if it hadn't been for the weather last week, kind of losing the week. But the Aussies did their part. It was an absolute phenomenal series, phenomenal test match as well, this last one. Overnight, it looked like the Aussies had it in the bag. They were 130 odd for no wicket, looking strong. The ball had done nothing all day yesterday. It was looking like it could be a painful finish to the test, to the series, to Stuart Broad's career. But they had other ideas, and they got a bit of luck with the change of ball, I think it's fair to say, because it suddenly started to move about a bit. But ultimately, it was just like the rest of the series, up and down and back and forth. It's just incredible. Two teams genuinely going toe to toe, playing different styles of cricket, but just toe to toe. Really enjoyable to watch from the very first ball of the series right the way through. Simply incredible. So enjoyable to watch. And I'm very disappointed in some ways that it's over. And I'm also disappointed that they crammed all these tests in to like a 6-week period or whatever it is. And now we kind of got to go without Test cricket. The 100 starts next week. Got some tickets for going to see Welsh Fire, among other things. But yeah, still a bit disappointing that there's no more Ashes, no more Test cricket, no more Ashes for like 2 years, which is even more depressing to think about. But ultimately, it's been a fun time. So yeah, it's a bit weird because it's like obviously a lot of my normal audience is football related, but I'm hoping we might see a few regulars, a few questions. I know on Twitter we've got a bit of a kind of crickety following, because obviously we have the cricket show, which has got its own cricketing what's it called? It's got its own site and stuff. So there's that as well. So we'll have a look. We'll have a chat. It'll be up for download afterwards, as always, through the Sports Social Podcast Network. So please do, if you have any questions, you've got any views on the series as a whole, as the match today, some of the controversial points that we've seen, obviously, over the past couple of weeks, which have been interesting. But what I'd like to do is, before we discuss today's game, let's go back kind of through the tests and kind of go from there. The series started with almost not controversy, but a bit of an interesting decision on England's side. Jack Leach had a stress fracture to the back, which meant he was out, their first choice spinner. Many people, including myself, felt that they should go with a young man, Rehan Ahmed. But it would have been a lot of pressure, such a lot of pressure for someone who's like 19 to go and bowl first choice at the Ashes. I mean, you look at Todd Murphy, and he plays a couple of games for Australia as the spinner after Nathan Lyon got injured. And only this test really where they fully trusted him to bowl the overs. Is a big step. So they brought in Moeen Ali out of retirement, and fair play to him. Like particularly in this 5th test, he pulled a groin when he was batting in the first innings. Didn't bowl in the first innings then, and he what a stint he did with the bat and then with the ball in the second innings. Unbelievable. Took some really important wickets. Ben Stokes made an error which nearly cost them with Steve Smith just before lunch. But going back to that, obviously, you had Jack Leach out straight away, which was a blow. At the start of the series, Chris Wokes, Mark Wood were not fit. So they had Josh Tongue in for that first test, Ollie Robinson. Who else was there in that first test? Seems like so long ago. Obviously, Johnny Bairstow was chosen to keep wicket, which I think was controversial in itself because a lot of people. I'm a former wicketkeeper myself. Played to like a high level as well in my teens, and wicketkeeping is a very specialist position. And Ben Foakes is one of the top 3 wicketkeepers in the world. He's absolutely outstanding behind the sticks. But what I don't like is people kind of implying that he can't bat. Like he's a good batsman, but he's not quite in the same mould as a Bairstow or Harry Brook. He's not as quick scoring. He's not as aggressive, but he's a very, very good batsman, make no mistake. Johnny Bairstow was picked for his batting. And I don't think that's, at that point, I don't think it was that controversial. The only controversial thing was, can you put Johnny Bairstow in there and then get Ben Foakes in as well? So as it turned out, Ben Stokes was only going to be able to bowl very few overs in the series as a whole. By the last couple of tests, he wasn't able to bowl at all. So at that point, you probably can't get him in. But in that first test, I did think they could have got him in because Ben Stokes was bowling at that point. Johnny Bairstow had to be in the batting lineup. Last summer, before he broke his leg, I think he scored like 100 in every test or something stupid. Like, he is a beast. But he clearly wasn't fit. And in those early tests, the drop catches, the bad keeping, did cost England. And I'll speak about it in a minute as we go through the test matches. I think ultimately some of those drop catches probably cost them winning the Ashes. But it's difficult to say because obviously they lost those first 2 games, which was all the games were really close. Those first 2 games, they were in a position to win, particularly in the one. They threw it away in some ways just by not batting as intelligently as they did later in the series. But the first test, we came in. Nathan Lyon was obviously in the side for Australia. It's a massive bowler for them. So England won the toss, elected to bat. And they scored 393 for 8 off 78 overs. Joe Root scored 100. They batted Australia around a little bit in that innings. Like the first ball of the whole series went for 4 from Zach Crawley. It was he was making a statement. And by the way, he played. And by the way, he was the one that everyone was calling for, Zach Crawley. Everyone was saying, drop Crawley, move Pope up or put Bairstow up open and then get Ben Foakes in. Crawley was the one who people were saying to drop. And he ended up the leading run scorer for the whole series. So they banged in nearly 400 off 78 overs and declared on the first day, which was very attacking, but a very aggressive thing, which nearly won them the game. Now, people will look at it with hindsight, and hindsight, Ben Stokes said something earlier in his interview, hindsight always wins. It does. It always wins. But at that point, you're thinking, that's really aggressive. They declared. I think there was, not long left in the day, so they wanted to get a couple of overs in. Australia replied with 386. Now, it was Kujara who really did the damage in that. He scored 141 of 321 balls. He cemented that innings and really, really kept them together. Ollie Robinson was the sort of pick of the bowlers, I think, from England's side. Nathan Lyon was the pick in the first innings for Australia. But it was very even in that first innings of the first test. It was very even. But it was also very reminiscent of how the series was going to play out. Both sides scored about the same amount of runs, give or take. England were very aggressive, scored their runs very quickly with, just under 80 overs, nearly scored 400, whereas Australia took nearly 120 overs to score 386. Kajala scored 141 off like 300 balls, whereas Joe Root scored 118 not out of 150 balls. It was very reminiscent of how the series was going to progress. Now, England then absolutely just went on a blitz and scored 273 off 60 odd overs. Harry Brook was the top scorer with 46 off 52. Pat Cummins bowled absolutely superbly. So England resumed on day 4. They were 28 for 2. I think Pope went relatively early, and then Harry Brook took the attack to Australia. Root scored, I think, 40 odd. And as they went into lunch, they were about 150 off for 5. They had a lead of 162. Bairstow and Stokes both got starts again, this again was very reminiscent of the whole series for both sides. Is players getting starts 20 to 40 and then not going on. I don't remember an Ashes series where so few players got to between 40 and 80 and didn't go on and score hundreds. And that includes the big boys as well, your Roots and your Smiths and the like. It was very interesting to see that this wasn't happening. Pat Cummins bowled particularly well in that first test, really led from the front as a captain. So England set Australia 281, which is tantalising because there was plenty of time for Australia to get the runs. But 280 is still a big ask with in the fourth innings. Australia started their chase with 2 4s immediately off that first over. David Warner fell 36 again, another start, but that was in like the 18th over. And they brought in Scott Boland as a night watchman on that day 4 as it closed. And I think Kajala and Boland lasted, and Australia closed 107 for 3. I think still needing 174 to win. England were in control, and I think everyone thought England were going to go on and win that game at that point. The final day, they lost the morning to rain. Didn't start till I think it was around sort of 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It was, it was unfortunate. But Australia lost their 4th wicket within a couple of overs with the night watchman going to Broad. And then Mo Ali got ahead, and England went into tea with Australia 183 for 5 on the final day. Australia needed 98 and England needed 5 wickets. So it was really even, very similar to today, in fact, really even. So then you've got after tea then, Robinson got a wicket quite quickly. Stokes got Kajala. I apologize, I keep butchering his name. So they were, England didn't take the new ball at that point, which I think was a mistake, but they didn't have a Mark Wood at this point. So they didn't have that out-and-out pace for a strike bowler. They got Australia 8 down as Carey went caught and bowled to Root. And Australia at this point, they still needed 54 runs, but they only had 2 wickets left. So then they take the new ball, but England just couldn't get those last 2 wickets. And you had the very experienced Nathan Lyon and the captain, Pat Cummins, see them through to win by 2 wickets. And Ben Stokes took a lot of criticism after that first test for the early declaration, for the general way in which they conducted themselves, in terms of they were very aggressive. People said they should have put the runs on the board rather than declaring early at just under 400. They should have put 400 or 500 on the board and batted Australia out of the game. But that's just not the way this England team plays cricket. And what it does is it makes for sensational viewing, because they're not interested in the draw. And then Australia is a very kind of traditional test side in the way that they bowl, the way that they bat, and they had to adapt their field setups to look at the aggression of the English batsmen. So they very often you'd have fielders on the boundary, and you'd have very one-day like fields. But Australia took the first test. It was 1-0. But I think England came away from that first test feeling like we should have won that. And ultimately, I think it was within their grasp. When you get to 2 wickets, 2 wickets down and they still needed 50 odd, I think they should have won that. And I would even go as far to say that if they had had Woakes and Wood at this point, I think they probably would have finished off the tail, because as we saw today and we saw in the last tests, those guys blow away the tail. Pace and movement does for the tail. But we went into the second test with Australia 1 up. Things were really hotting up at this point. Really hotting up. It was it's just exciting. So England won the toss again. They elected to field. Josh Tongue was in for this one as well, for England. Australia batted first. They scored 416. Steve Smith with a sublime 100. Really, really good. But Josh Tongue bowled very well for his 3 wickets. They set England 416, and they scored pretty quick because they got them in about 100 overs. Not massively quick, but probably a bit quicker than traditional Test match batting, I suppose. But England then scored 325. But what was kind of key to keeping this game interesting, with this test interesting, was they scored them very quickly. They scored them in 76 overs. Ben Duckett scored 98. They were very, very aggressive again. And so they, about 100 off. So Australia had that lead of 100. But England got them out pretty cheaply there. Stuart Broad with a masterclass of swing bowling, four wickets for 65 off 25 overs. Koala scored 77 again. Great. So his, in the first 2 tests, Kajala scored 141, 65, and then another 77. Very, very good start to the series from him. And again, it was so tight, this test, even though Australia had that 100 run lead from the first innings. England were only chasing 371, which sounds a lot for a 4th innings. But we've seen England in recent years. We've seen England since Stokes has taken over, chase down these types of totals pretty well. Obviously, you go back to 2019 before Stokes was captain, and Stokes did this at Headingley. Led aside a batting with the tail. Again, Stokes tried to do the same thing as that Headingley test back in 2019. This time as captain, he scored 155. England were bowled out for 327. They came up short. Again, Pat Cummins, the pick of the Australian bowlers in that second innings. Really, really clever. But what they did this time with the chase that they didn't do back in 2019 is they found ways to slow down Stokes at different points with their field settings. So he had to be a bit more clever in when. So what he was doing is if he was on strike and he had the tail end at the other end, is they would do the normal thing, 4 balls, then they'd come in to stop the single, to stop them changing, getting Stokes on strike for the next over. But instead of taking that, he would then try and hit the boundaries when the field came in to get the sums up. And as that day 5 began, Duckett and Stokes were in. They were both playing very positively. I think I remember there was maybe an LBW or 2 overturned, and things seemed to be looking good. They were kind of set up. And then all of a sudden, Duckett went just short of his century again. Bairstow walked out of his crease to talk to Stokes. Hadn't been called over. Keeper threw down the stumps and he had the ball in his hand. He was very within his rights to do it. There was a big hoo-ha, and people discussed the spirit of cricket and stuff. It was a bit of a brain fart from Bairstow. Like, for me, as a wicketkeeper, the ball came through to Carey. He caught it. Bairstow kind of tapped in his ground and then went for a walk. But at that point, like, Carey still had the ball in his hands. Like, anyone who's watched cricket or has been a wicketkeeper, the wicketkeeper takes the ball if there's no contact from the batter and stuff, and then he'll catch it and then he'll throw it to the slip normally, or to one of the fielders, and then it kind of makes its way back to the bowler. If the keeper's still got in his hands, as a batsman, as far as I'm concerned, that's still alive. Even though it was the end of the over, it's still alive while the keeper's got in his hands. And I think only when he throws it to one of the other fielders, to me, is when he's sort of signalling, right, we're making it way back to the bowler. And the umpire hadn't called over. There was a big hoo-ha. People were not happy. Bairstow was fuming. Broad was in next, and he was fuming. So it was all a bit testy. Then you had the big thing in the Lords, in the long room, as the Australian players went through. There were some things said. The Australian players took exception. But still, Ben Stokes was marching on. 9 4s, 9 6s, 155 he scored. But England fell short. Thought Stokes was going to do it again. But once Stokes fell, you felt like even though they only needed 70, they didn't have someone to see them through. Like you needed a Bairstow or a Stokes, two guys who were very, very good at batting with those tail enders. And you just didn't have that. England's last wicket partnership in that game, though, survived for like 7 or 8 overs, I think it was. They got them within about 40 odd. But before that, Mitchell Starc bowled Josh Tongue to seal the victory. So Australia were 2 up. But it very much felt like it could have been easily 2-0 to England also. Like it was that close, and it was these little decisions. And unfortunately, in both those games, Johnny Bairstow had dropped some catches. He dropped a couple of catches. I remember he dropped Mitchell Marsh in the 3rd test, that was. I apologise. But I'm pretty sure he dropped Steve Smith in one of the first 2 tests as well. And then they went on and got runs. And this is the problem. When you drop catches, the top batsmen make you pay. And Australia, I think, they made England pay when they made mistakes. I forget which test it was, but there was a point in one of the tests where England were about 200 odd for 2 or 3, and Australia would look broken. Mentally, they just looked completely shell-shocked, and England were cruising, and all they had to do was just keep going, not give their wicket away. So Australia was so out of ideas that they kind of reverted to just bowling bouncers. And as we saw, I think it was the 4th test, when Australia resorted to this in the 4th test, the England batsmen just refused to hook for like a couple of overs, and then it was a waste of time, and they had to abandon that plan. And if England had done that in that test when they were like 200 odd for 2 or 3, I forget which test it was. Maybe it'll be the 3rd one I'm going to talk about now. But they ended up losing, I think, 3 wickets hooking in the space of a few overs, and it completely derailed that test. And they were always kind of playing from behind after that. And I just felt like that lacked a bit of game awareness. You know, yes, be aggressive, but there's sometimes you've got to dig in. Like Australia today in the 5th test, you know, they were awesome yesterday. Australia were in the way they batted, but when that ball started moving, the batsmen had to dig in, and there was a couple of them who were still driving. You know, the ball was spinning, and they're driving out of the rough. You've got to adapt your game, whatever sport you're playing, fighting, boxing, football. As the game situation changes, you have to adapt your plans. You have to adapt how you're going to approach the game. And I just felt in a couple of the moments early on in the test series that they were the moments that Australia really, really won. They adapted better as the game was moving. And England, so like England dropped catches, Australia punished them. England were cruising and Australia was struggling, and England didn't capitalize on it, and in fact kind of gave their wickets away. And I understand what Ben Stokes said in response to that. He said, you know, it wasn't the plan of hooking, it was the execution. If they'd hooked them for 6, no one's saying anything. But then later in the series they decided not to hook when Australia resorted to that plan. They got through that sort of period, and they made Australia pay, and they went on and won the test match. So I think it's you can be aggressive, but you always have a plan B. You always have a plan B, a plan C, and you have to adapt to the game conditions and what's happening around you. It's top level sport. Things don't always go your way. Things don't always just happen as you want them to, and they don't always go with the plan that you start out with before the game. You make plans before the game. Something changes, you have to adapt. And I thought as the series went on, England did that much better. And look, maybe Ben Stokes is growing a bit as a captain as he goes along. Maybe not, I don't know. But so England went into this third test. Somehow they were 2-0 down, which was remarkable in some ways. And it was going to be an interesting one because England, facing defeat, 2-0 down, they would have to win 3 on the bounce to win the series. They made 3 changes to the team. One was forced with Ollie Pope being out because he was ruled out of the series with a shoulder injury. Moeen Ali had come back in after missing the second test from a finger injury. James Anderson and Josh Tongue were rested, with Mark Woods and Chris Woakes coming in for their first appearances of the series. This is when things changed for England on the bowling front. Look, I love Jimmy Anderson. He's one of my favourite English bowlers. Him and Broad, probably my 2 favourite English bowlers of all time, alongside Ian Botham and Freddie. But Jimmy Anderson is not the bowler he once was. He's still clever, but he was largely ineffective in this series for long periods. And that showed today in the 5th test when Jimmy Anderson barely bowled. He did bowl a bit, I remember seeing, but he largely didn't bowl. So going forward, I think we're going to see him less and less. He said he's not going to retire, but I wonder whether it might almost be enforced because I can't see him going out to India. I don't think he'll be effective there. The conditions won't suit, and he hasn't got the pace of a Woakes or a Wood anymore to really trouble people when the ball's not moving. But maybe he'll go, to help with the younger lads and the experience. I don't know. So the 3rd test, so Woakes and Wood came in, and this is really where it changed for England, in my opinion. Nathan Lyon was out for the series with an injury to his calf. So Australia made a couple of changes. Also, they brought in, Lyon was dropped out with injury. Cameron Green was dropped. They brought in Todd Murphy, who I actually thought looks quite decent, but he's only played a handful of tests, if that. So he's very inexperienced. But they also brought back Mitchell Marsh out of the international wilderness. And Josh Hazlewood dropped out, and Scott Boland returned, which I thought was a mistake, because Josh Hazlewood, his English conditions suit his bowling. England won the toss again, no doubt. They won all the tosses bar one, I think. But they opted to bowl this time, and David Warner drove the first ball of the morning. I'd be interested to know if this series was some sort of record for first balls of sessions being driven or being hit for a boundary. Seems like almost every session batsmen tried to implement a bit of aggressiveness into the bowlers off every session, But so he drove Broad for 4 the first ball that test, but then he fell within 4 balls again to Stuart Broad. This time, Ollie Robinson opened the bowling with Stuart Broad, and I actually thought he did really well. Robinson, I thought he was a bit unlucky to be dropped, actually, to bring Anderson back in later in the series, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Mark Wood came into the attack in the 7th over with Australia 1 down, and in that opening spell, he bowled up to 95 mile an hour. Just that raw pace, but also he was moving the ball. He was swinging it away from the right-handers, and he just looked aggressive. But also he got the crowd up. He got the crowd going. Woakes came in, did a tremendous job as well. So suddenly England had Robinson and Broad bowling, really accurate away swing. especially Broad against the left-handers. He's so difficult because of that weird angle he creates. He goes around the wicket and then moves it away, which is such an unusual angle for the left-handers. And then you had Woakes and Wood come in, pace and movement, and it was really difficult for the Australians. They went into lunch, and on that day one, 91 for 4, and England just looked on top. They just looked a different animal. They looked more aggressive in the field now. I mean, they looked more aggressive. They looked just like they had something about them, And I know, they had to win these games, but so you're always a bit more lively in that situation. But Australia, just from that very first morning, they looked a bit shell-shocked. They just didn't quite look like they knew. It was like they'd never faced bowling that fast, which they obviously have. So the afternoon session came about, and that returning Mitchell Marsh was dropped early on. I think he was dropped on like 4 or 6 or something. Went on to score 102 ball century, and Ollie Robinson went off with a back spasm. So England were 1 bowler down. Marsh was eventually out for about 120 odd. With I think it was Woakes got him. So Australia recovered and got up to 240 for 5 after tea, and it was really like finally set. You felt at that point, because Australia's tail had wagged nicely in these initial tests. Like Australia had really done well at the lower end of the order. England had struggled to pick up the wickets, and obviously in that first test was the problem. They'd lost by 2 wickets because they couldn't get those final 2 guys out, but then they didn't have the pace of Mark Wood, I guess. After tea, Head fell for about 40 odd. Woakes got a wicket. Then Joe Root took a great catch after he had dropped Alex Carey the previous delivery. And then 2 overs later, Mark Wood came back and just decimated the tail. He took Mitchell Starc and Pat Cummins in the space of 3 deliveries, and he got his 4th wicket a couple of overs later. Then he got his 5th wicket, and England got Australia all out for 263, with Mark Wood picking up a 5 for, and England felt like they had the upper hand coming out of that innings. They'd got him out cheaply. Wood and Woakes and Broad were firing, but they were 1 bowler down with Robinson injured. Duckett fell very early. I think he got 1 or 2. And then Cummins again was the pick of the bowlers in that early period. 2 overs later, because Harry Book came in at 3. It didn't last long. He didn't enjoy it. He never looked comfortable. He was out for 3, and he did not bat 3 again, even from the second innings. They lost Crawley for about 30 odd. So England closed the day on 68 for 3, replying to so they were 2-2, still 200 behind. So where they'd come off really positive after bowling Australia out, it had swung back again. So it was just constant swinging back and forth in this series. Even like it wasn't even like a session to 1, a session to 2. It was like half a session, just back and forth and back and forth. So that second day was really shaping up for England. Needed something because they got Australia out cheaply, and really they'd have been looking to go out and get a score quickly and get a good lead from that first innings. Root was out second ball of the day. Then Bairstow, Stokes and Ali rebuilt the innings a little bit. But yeah, England were 142 for 7 at lunch. Straight after lunch, though, Mark Wood hit 18 off the first over, 2 sixes and a 4, another 6 in the next over before he was caught at mid-wicket. But what that did is it just seemed to wake up Ben Stokes. And Stokes just went after the Australian batting at that point. And all of a sudden, they went from sort of struggling, and England, Stokes just hit, I think, 5 or 6 sixes as he brought up his 50. And then finally, I think he got about 80 odd, maybe. I'm not 100% sure. I can't remember that. But England got up to 237. which was a great effort considering they were 140 odd for 7. So they did really well to get it. Just deficit of 26, not really much. And then they got at Australia in the second innings. Broad got Warner again, second time in the match. And they just were on top. 29 for 1, lead of 55 for Australia. And then after tea, Moeen Ali, this was when he started to come into the series. He picked up 2 quick wickets, but it was who they were. He got Labuschagne, who was set on 33, and he got Steve Smith before he gets set. And Steve Smith was also his 200th wicket at that point. So after the drinks break in that final session on day 2 of the third test, Wogs got Kajala straight away, caught behind, and then Head and Marsh sort of recovered a little bit. They closed 116 for 4, so they had like 142 lead with 6 wickets to go. So I think England would have gone out of that. They would have been happy to have got Smith and Labuschagne. But what they didn't want to happen was Australia to go and score quickly in the morning. They needed to get those wickets done, try and keep that lead to as low as possible. So they weren't chasing too much because the pressures, 4th innings chases are just notoriously difficult. And then what happens? The weather delays, of course it does. It wasn't too long, but they eventually got back onto the pitch, and Mark Wood again. So you had Wogs got rid of Marsh and Carey, and then Wood just came out with this all-out blistering pace that just decimated Australia again. And Australia were all out. England was set 250 to win. Now, on paper, I think most people would expect this England team to be able to chase 251. They've chased much more, and they've chased it quickly, but there's always the thing of rain. England began their chase at like 7 o'clock at night, and on the third day, so there was plenty of time. So you think on paper, with that much time left, 250 should be easy. It's never easy. Test cricket is a minefield. 4th innings chases are a minefield. The pitch, is deteriorating. The ball will start to spin. But the thing that England had in their advantage is, number one, it was only a day 3 pitch rather than a usual, normally you're chasing day 4, day 5, where the pitch is much worse. And also, this was it. They didn't have Nathan Lyon to tie up one end that they, over the years, so often have had, where you can just have Nathan Lyon puts it on a sixpence and ties up one end, and you keep all your pace bowlers fresh, and they can get at the English batsmen. And I think this is, like, as much as Wood and Wilkes coming in changed the series for England, I think losing Nathan Lyon changed it for Australia, because they were never able to keep their bowlers fresh, because England just kept going. They kept coming. They kept being aggressive. So these bowlers weren't bowling particularly. I think took some tack in that game, and they weren't able to control the flow of runs, which means they kept switching the bowlers. The pace bowlers were never able to really settle down into a rhythm. They were never able to get a rest. So England faced that 5 overs, 27 for 0. So going into day 4, England had 10 wickets. They were 27 for 0 wicket, comfortable. I think most people thought they would chase it down. You just don't know with this England side, though, because they go so hard that you just wonder, could they get themselves in a pickle? But they bat deep, so you're expecting them. And they lost their first wicket pretty quickly, about 5 overs in. But then Moeen Ali comes out to bat at number 3. Harry Brooks was back to 5 where I think he's much more comfortable. And Moeen Ali has batted at number 3 before, test level and in 1 days. But I also think it was, I don't think people were expecting he's just come out of retirement, It's not like anyone was expecting too much of him. But if he could hang around for a bit, that would have been a bonus, because he'll score quick. He's got great technique, but he's also susceptible to the short ball and stuff like that. So I think, it was a gamble. And I think actually Ben Stokes coming in at 3 in this 5th test, I thought that looked much more natural. And maybe that's where we might go in the future. But we'll discuss that when we get to it. Root came in as well. Ali didn't last long. He was gone for 5. Root came in. He got a bit of a partnership going with Crawley, but it was then Crawley who fell for 44. And England were 93 for 3. And you're thinking, oh, God, here we go. But Harry Brook came in back at his usual spot on number 5. And he played himself in by just scoring boundaries. Stark and Boland both took a bit of tap. They couldn't get the flow of runs under control. They couldn't settle into a good session of bowling for them. And Harry Brook really disrupted them. Excuse me. But then Joe Root just gloved one down the leg side when he was set on his 20s with Stokes coming in. And then it was like, it wasn't panic stations, because England at this point, like 150 at lunch, they went in 150 odds for 4. So like the target was down now into like double figures. But then Stokes goes straight after lunch, caught down the leg side, and you're just thinking, oh, for God's sake, here we go. Bairstow comes in. 2 overs later, he's bowled by Stark, and you're starting to get a bit twitchy. But a good old Wokes, Chris Wokes came in and completely steadied the ship with Harry Brook. Harry Brook got a crucial 50 off 67 balls. My one criticism of Brook in this particular instance is that he should have seen it through. He should have been there with Wokes at the end to see this through. He got caught top edge in a catch to Stark for 75, and they nearly bumped into each other actually as they went to court. It would have been funny, but there we go. And then with that was the last wet record. So Brook was the last recognised batsman England had. He was gone. Wokes was settled. England needed 21. Mark Wood comes in. And Mark Wood is not going to hang around. He's either going to smash it or he's going to get out. And he went about it as you expect. He struck 16 in 8 balls. And then Wokes hit the winning runs. And Wokes finished 32 not out and secured a 3-wicket victory for England. And actually, in this game, I thought England were excellent, because there was a few times where I thought, like, they came out of that first innings after getting Australia out for under 300, and I really felt like they could put Australia to the sword. If they could score 350, 400 quickly, they could put Australia under pressure, and they didn't. They actually went into the second innings with a deficit, but then they got him even cheaper. So the bowling from Stuart Broad and Mark Wood in particular was just outstanding. It was a really great victory. So then you've got this thing. There's 2 tests to go. England are 2-1 down. Can they do the unthinkable? Can they win 3 on the bounce, come from 2-0 down and win the Ashes? And they won the toss again, as was the run. And they elected to field. And again, they got Australia out for under 350, 317 off 90 overs. Mitchell Marsh again batted excellently, scoring a good 50. But it was Chris Wokes again. He was the pick. 5 wickets, absolutely outstanding. And him and Mark Wood was sensational. And this is where I feel the whole momentum of the series switched. So up until this point, up until this Australian first innings, I did feel it was very like pendulum back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But from the moment England got Australia out from 317 in the 4th test at Old Trafford, something just changed. England scored 592 in 107 overs. Zach Crawley scored 189 off 182 balls. They absolutely decimated the Australian bowling attack, absolutely destroyed it. It was sensational. Unbelievable batting. It truly was. Zach Crawley was incredible, backed up by some others. And it was just impressive the way I've never seen an Australian side look that like broken and decimated. And Johnny Bairstow was incredible as well, under a lot of pressure, taking a lot of criticism about his keeping. Hadn't really scored any runs. I think he scored 150. He ended on 99 not out after Crawley had done the damage early on. I bat him with the tail, and he hit some unbelievable sixes. A couple of he does like a hook, but it's like a flat bat hook, and it just goes straight over. It's unbelievable. So England were bowled out for 592, and it was just unbelievable. So they had a first innings lead of 275. So Australia had to score. For some of my viewers, maybe who don't know cricket that well, Australia had to score 275 to even make England bat again. So they were under pressure. Wood was bowling some fast balls. The others were backing him up, and it was intense. David Warner fell to Woakes early, but Labuschagne and Smith, as they so often do, got a bit of a partnership going and really steadied the ship a little bit. Before then, Mark Wood took his 100th test wicket by just getting Steve Smith, and he got him a couple of times. That really, him and Woakes took such important wickets. Like today, they took important wickets, and it really turned the tide in England's favour. And Australia would sort of get a bit of a partnership, and then they would build, and the close was delayed till 7:15 that day. Australia were 113 for 4, still had 160 to score before they could even think about anything else. But day 4 came, which was a Saturday. They'd expected bad weather. So England had batted even more aggressively when they'd scored their 592 because they knew the rain was coming on the Saturday. So the initial thought was it was going to rain Saturday, but Sunday would be okay. So they were going to lose a day. So they'd bat quick, bat aggressively, get the runs on the board, and then try to, recover from the time that they lost. They had like a little period on Saturday where they managed to get some bowling done, and then they had a bit where they could only bowl spin, and they did get Labuschagne out for 111, but by the time the rain came and delayed tea, and then the rain came again, Australia were 214 for 5. They were 61 behind, and then that was it for Saturday. And then unfortunately, all day on the Sunday it rained, so that was declared a draw, which is unfortunate because it would have been incredible to go into this 5th test, which finished today, at 2-2. It would have just been simply incredible. Australia would have been 2-0 up. England would have won 2 on the bounce. It would have just been amazing theatre to be able to go into that final test 2-2. Wasn't to be, unfortunately, because of the British weather. But the 5th test did not disappoint. Stuart Broad announced he was retiring a couple of days into this 5th test. So this was his last ever cricket match. England named an unchanged side. Australia brought back in spinner Todd Murphy with Cameron Green dropping out. And Pat Cummins finally won the toss, and he decided to bowl. England's openers were very good at the start. We scored just a 50 partnership in like 10 overs. Again, super aggressive. And Ben Duckett was looking awesome. He'd made 41 off 41, and then he just gloved one behind, like out of the blue again. Australia looked mentally shot in the field. Like a few times I thought they looked like they were really struggling with ideas and what to do with England. Like they just couldn't stem the runs. And there was points where they weren't able to get the wickets. But because England are so aggressive, there's always a chance. and then Duckett fell, and then suddenly Australia picked up Zach Crawley and Joe Root very quickly. Pat Cummins again, Josh Hazelwood, and then Harry Brook and Moeen Ali came together. They put on a 50 partnership, and they kind of steered the innings and just settled it down. So they went into lunch on that first day, England 130 for 3. I think both sides would have been happy with that. I think the only thing Australia wouldn't have been happy with really was the rate that England had scored. It was like to score 131 in the first morning session of a test is pretty sensational. Straight after lunch, Brook brought up his 50 and Moeen pulled a groin. So he just had to hit sixes because he couldn't run. And then Benjamin Stokes came in, but he only managed to get 3 off the 16 balls. Mitchell Starc did well. Johnny Bairstow also only scored 4. So 3 balls later, Brook was out for 85. And England weren't doing great. They ended up at 250 for 7. And they had a bit of a tea break. And then Wilkes was given LBW straight after, but he got it overturned. There was a little edge, but unfortunately, 2 balls later, fortunately, 2 balls later, then Wilkes was dropped at gully, and Australia had dropped 5 catches throughout that day, which is pretty unheard of. And this is what I was saying about, I think Australia were mentally broke by that fourth test when England scored just under 600 so quickly. Like, they mentally just looked, in the field at least, looked shot. 5 catches is unheard of from an Australian side. And they just kept going and going and going. England eventually got out for a 283, which is not amazing, but it's the speed at which they scored. Like, this was still day one. Australia came out to reply. Again, David Warner was caught after making a start. So they finished the day one, 61 for 1. And I think Australia would have been happy with that, getting England out for under 300 and only losing the 1 wicket while scoring 60 in reply. But day 2 was when it started to hot up. Because Australia, I think they got themselves in a bit of a pickle on day 2. They obviously came in with the attitude to kind of dig in and, get through the movement, get through the early period, and then we'll score. But they just never got past the digging in part. They dug in and they hung around. They just didn't score any runs. They scored 21 runs in the first hour before the drinks break, and the 4 overs after the drinks break. And then Mark Wood got lavishing with an unbelievable catch by Joe Root. And that was the only wicket which fell then. So Australia were 115 for 2 at lunch. And it was the rate at which Australia scored, the speed at which they scored, or lack of. It really put them into pressure, because you always felt like if England pick up a couple of wickets here, Australia are in trouble because they just haven't scored. It was just maiden after maiden. And 5 balls after lunch, Broad got Kajala 3 short of his half century. And then this is where it really hotted up in terms of things just moved quickly. 2 overs later, Head was gone. And then Carey was gone. Mitchell Marsh chopped on. And just Starc was the final wicket to fall in that session before tea, trying to pull Wood. And Australia were 186 for 7. And suddenly, Australia had gone from being really happy at that initial point where they'd got rid of they got England out for under 300, thinking that they can go on and put England under pressure in this first innings, and it was like they might not even get up to where England were. Only had 3 wickets left. Straight after that, the tea break, England thought they'd run Steve Smith out, but Johnny Bairstow knocked the ground with his gloves. Knocked the wicket with his gloves, not the ball. However, it was revealed later on, after 60 million camera angles, that he probably should have been out. but you can't expect the umpire to have had. They haven't got that time to make that decision. So I do think he made the decision that he had to make at the time. Cummins and Smith put together like a 50 partnership, and that was really vital to just getting Australia closer and closer. And then Murphy came out and just hit, I think, a few fours, 3, 4, 6s. He's made 34 off like 30 odd balls, and eventually he was out. Australia ended on 295, so they had like a lead of 12 or whatever. And you're thinking that day 3 then is going to be vital, because Australia will be fired up to try and get England cheap, because if they get England cheap, they haven't got to chase much, and it's game over. They'd be the first Australian side to win the Ashes in England for a long time. But if England get off to, if they score quickly, they can really put Australia under pressure and score a lot of runs, leaving them with a very uphill task. They can draw the series, and in Australia retain the Ashes, but again, the Australians are unable to win a series in England. Again, Crawley struck the first ball for a boundary, and it's got to be in the record. I'd love to know. Like, so many of the first balls of each session struck for boundaries. The 2 openers put on 50 again, but again, it was the speed. 8 overs, they scored 50 partnership. Duckett went, and it was so interesting. Crawley scored 73 again and was superb. Ben Stokes came out at number 3. And in my opinion, I think that's possibly where we might see him for the foreseeable future. Certainly while he can't bowl. Although there's been things about him bowling off spin, which is interesting. But Stuart Broad announced he was retiring at the end of day 3 as well. So we knew it was his last day. Joe Root scored a great 50. Harry Brook fell cheaply. So England was sort of 265 for 4. So they had about a lead of 250. But Root and Bairstow were there. They both got 50s. Bairstow brought up his with a beautiful cover drive, and he looked back to his old self. He looked fit again, and he took some great catches as well in this. He took 2 really good, one off pace and one off spin, exceptional catches. So eventually England set him 377, and well, unbelievable stuff. And it was set up perfectly, because Australia yesterday welcomed Broad to the field with a guard of honour, and it all was a bit weird as him and Jimmy Anderson came out to bat. England only had 1 wicket left. It was all a bit weird. They got him out really quickly, and they set Australia 384 to win. Now, on paper, 384, you're thinking, Jesus, not many teams can get that, in English conditions, 4th and 5th day of a test. And it's never been like the highest chasing score in at the Oval is like, I think 260 or something like that, 270. So it's a very uphill task. But Australia started like a house on fire. They had 50 partnership in 14 overs, fastest they'd scored all series. They reached lunch and they were 75 for no wicket. And eventually the rain came at about in the afternoon session. But Australia finished 135 for no wicket. So they started today only needing 249 more. And this is where it's interesting, because 249 is a lot more manageable. Still got 10 wickets in hands. So both teams were going for the win today. And it was a mad day. Like, England had in an early session, you had Wokes got, again, Wokes, by the way, unbelievable bowling today. He just bowled, just on the spot, moving it away all the time. Got Warner, then he got Kajala, then Wood comes in, injured, but just bowls as fast as he can, gets Labuschagne cheap. But then Smith and Head both just settled the ship for that hour. So England had the first hour, and then Australia had that second hour before lunch. So it was really interesting, because whilst England had taken 3 wickets, Australia had also added to the runs. So it was like, this isn't ideal. by the time England got head out, which was Moeen Ali caught Root for 43, they got it up to like 264 for 4. So they only had like 100 odd or 150 to score from there. And just before lunch, Moeen Ali bowls. Steve Smith plays a shot, and it comes off his glove. Ben Stokes jumps, catches it, but then as he's bringing his arm around, he hits his arm against his leg and drops the ball. Damn. And you're thinking, oh no. Smith looked so focused. You thought, he's going to do this now. And when he scored his 50, he didn't celebrate. And you're just thinking, oh no. But again, Wilkes got him with a great catch by Crawley. Crawley's catching in this series has been sensational, by the way. And then again, the wickets fell in clusters. Smith, Head, Marsh. Bairstow's catch off Mitchell Marsh was so good because Ali comes in, bowls it, and he plays his shot, and it just sort of clips his back. And Bairstow's got to dive to his right and react. Reactions were sensational. But then Carey battles back with a bit of support from Cummins and Murphy, and then more wickets fall and more wickets fall, and then cometh the hour, cometh the man, right up, right at the end. Stuart Broad, the script was written, picks up 2 wickets to finish off the Australian innings. And I tell you what, the skill that Stuart Broad bowled with again today, around the wicket to the left-hander. Normally right-handed bowlers will go around the wicket to a left-hander to create that angle to kind of go into them, to tuck him up, to make him not give him any room. But he puts it on off stump and he moves, swings it away. And it's such a weird angle. The left-handers cannot deal with it at all. The crowd was bumping and it was just sensational. It was a great day's cricket. And I've got to say, it was weird because Australia retained the Ashes. So you're not like celebrating winning the Ashes. But I actually thought this was one of the great Ashes series. I really thought it was sensational series. From start to finish, sensational. Oh, and by the way, just before Broad got Murphy out, he switches to Bales again, which to do that twice in the same game, switch to Bales and then take a wicket the next ball. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. Really thought it was sensational. And I'm glad that Ben Stokes dropping the catch didn't cost him because he's been a great captain. Well done, Johnny Bairstow, for coming through all the criticism to score the runs in the last couple of tests and then to take some of the catches he's taken in the last couple of tests as well. Takes a strong mental side to be able to say that. And then as they left the pitch, you had Moeen Ali and Stuart Broad left the pitch together to be clapped off by everyone. I don't think we'll see Moeen Ali again. I think it's time we give Rahan Ahmed a go in India where the pitches are going to be conducive to him. But I also think there's a couple of others like your Jacks, Dawson, got to be in with a shout. We've got to get these other spinners in while Jack Leach is out. We have to find other spinners. We can't keep going back to Moeen Ali. And we can't rely on Jack Leach at the moment because of his injuries. I also think we've got to have a conversation about Ben Foakes. Being a wicketkeeper is a specialist position. We have one of the best in the world for that position. So let's get him in. If you don't think his batting is conducive to what England are doing, then bat him lower down the order. But ultimately, he should be in the side because he's one of the best wicketkeepers in the world. We are going to miss Stuart Broad terribly. I understand for his reasons and his personal reasons why he wanted to go out now. But I am gutted because I think he's still so skillful. He's so good. And you look at how effective he was for the 5 tests, and you look at how well he bowled and how much impact he had on the 5 tests. He's 4 years younger than Jimmy Anderson. Jimmy Anderson had no effect on this series. Tried hard, great lad, love him, one of the best ever. You can't take him to India unless he's just going to help the younger players. Stuart Broad, what a career. I love the shithousery from him. I love his attitude. I love his passion for playing for this country. And I love his ability to be a skillful bowler. But ultimately a great series full of ups and downs. I actually thought England were the better side over the 5 games, but Australia adjusted in the moment a bit better than what England did, which I get is sometimes easier to say with hindsight. I think in the first couple of tests, dropped catches cost England, and Australia, when they needed to, dug in. When England needed to maybe dig in that first or second test, I think it was, they didn't, and it probably cost them those 3 quick wickets hooking. Probably cost them that test and probably the series. But a great series, a great series. And a little word on the likes of Steve Smith, David Warner, who we won't see in an Ashes series again. They've already said they're going to be finishing up soon. Steve Smith is one of the great batsmen. He'll be up there with the Bradmans and the Bothams and the Graham Smiths and people like this, like the true greats of the games. As will Stuart Broad be up there with the bowlers. David Warner, I love that. Like, he's the pantomime villain, but then he's also got a standing ovation when he was out today. He deserved that. Whatever you think about the stuff they did and they got banned and blah, blah, blah. As cricketers, I love the way they play. And I'll miss playing, miss watching them play, I got to say. So the next Ashes in a couple of years will look very, very different to what it looks like. The sides will look very different. Although I think Ben Stokes will still be captain unless things go horribly wrong. And probably would be bowling off spin. But look, I'd like to bring the cricket series back, State of Play, which we did previously with West Indian cricketer Kieran Powell and former Glamorgan player Nye Norman. It was a bit awkward just because Kieran's always travelling and stuff like that. But if you would like to see a regular cricket series, then let me know, because I do know a few cricketers which we could bring on board, as it were. I hope you kind of enjoyed it. I was just sort of running down the test and just looking back on the series. It's been a great series. If you would be interested in getting involved in the cricket series, then drop me a DM. If you'd like to just see it return, then let me know in the comments. But until later in the week, we'll be back. Well, Tuesday, Championship show, Cardiff show. Wednesday is the Championship Cardiff show. Thursday is the Football News Weekly. And we've got a special guest joining us this week, which is Theo from the Shed End podcast. But until then, I bid you farewell. Cheers, guys.